There is a peculiar moment that almost everyone has experienced, though very few stop to question it. You glance at a clock, look away for only an instant, then glance back. For a fraction of a second, the second hand appears frozen, as though time itself hesitated before continuing. Your mind quickly dismisses the sensation as an illusion. But what if that explanation is only the beginning? For thousands of years, humanity has treated time as the invisible river, carrying every life from birth toward death. We organize civilizations around it. We build calendars, clocks, schedules, histories, and predictions. We celebrate its passing and mourn what it takes away. Entire economies exist because of it. Entire philosophies are built upon it. Yet despite all of this confidence, no one has ever seen time itself. We see clocks. We observe movement. We measure change. But time, the thing we imagine flowing beneath everything, remains strangely invisible. Imagine trying to explain the existence of wind without ever feeling air. You would watch leaves move. You would observe clouds drifting across the sky. You would invent instruments to measure pressure. Eventually, you would conclude that an unseen force must exist because its effects appear everywhere. That is remarkably similar to our relationship with time. We infer its existence through change, but inference is not observation. The distinction may seem trivial, yet history repeatedly reminds us that civilizations often mistake their most successful measurements for reality itself. Ancient astronomers once believed the sun revolved around Earth because every observation seemed to confirm it. For centuries, that interpretation appeared perfectly rational. Reality, however, had been quietly operating according to a completely different architecture. What if the same is true of time? What if clocks are measuring something real, but our interpretation of what they measure is fundamentally incomplete? This possibility has fascinated philosophers, mystics, mathematicians, and physicists across generations. Though their languages differ dramatically, they repeatedly converge upon one unsettling suggestion. Perhaps time is not moving. Perhaps we are. The difference changes everything. To appreciate why this idea refuses to disappear, we must first understand something far more basic. The human brain is not designed to perceive reality directly. Your eyes do not show you the world. They collect photons. Your ears do not hear reality. They detect fluctuations in air pressure. Your skin does not experience objects. It responds to electrical signals generated by microscopic receptors. Everything you call experience is assembled inside your nervous system. The color red does not exist outside perception. Neither does the sensation of warmth. Neither does the taste of sweetness. These are interpretations. The brain constructs an internal model of reality, using incomplete sensory information arriving milliseconds apart. Remarkably, modern neuroscience suggests that what you consciously experience as the present moment is already slightly delayed. Signals require time to travel from your senses into the brain. Different types of information arrive at different speeds. Vision, hearing, touch, balance, and proprioception all possess unique processing delays. If consciousness simply reported events as they arrived, reality would feel fragmented and incoherent. Instead, the brain performs an extraordinary feat. It waits. It gathers incoming information. It predicts missing pieces. Then it stitches everything together into what feels like a single seamless present. The present, in other words, may already be an edited reconstruction, not a live broadcast, a carefully synchronized narrative. This realization introduces an astonishing possibility. If your experience of now is already a constructed model, then perhaps what you perceive as the flow of time emerges from the way consciousness organizes information, not from time itself moving through the universe. The implications are profound. Imagine reading a novel. Every chapter already exists within the book. The ending is printed before you ever reach it. Nothing inside the pages moves. Only the reader advances. Characters experience suspense because they exist inside the story. The reader experiences sequence because pages are turned. Could reality function similarly? Could every event already exist within a deeper structure while consciousness moves through it, creating the sensation of temporal flow? Long before modern physics entertained comparable ideas, ancient traditions repeatedly described reality as something astonishingly similar. In certain schools of Hindu philosophy, time was portrayed less as a river and more as a dimension through which awareness travels. Certain Buddhist teachings described ordinary temporal experience as a product of conditioned perception, a useful framework rather than an ultimate truth. Ancient Greek philosophers wrestled endlessly with paradoxes, suggesting that motion and time might conceal deeper logical structures beyond immediate experience. Even indigenous cosmologies scattered across continents often described ancestors, descendants, and the living as existing within a shared field rather than isolated moments separated by irreversible distance. These traditions emerged independently, separated by oceans, separated by languages, separated by centuries. Yet somehow they arrived at strikingly compatible intuitions. Perhaps linear time is not fundamental. Perhaps it is experiential. Then came the 20th century. Modern physics began dismantling assumptions once considered untouchable. Albert Einstein's theories revealed that time behaves differently depending upon motion and gravity. Clocks moving at different speeds genuinely tick at different rates. Massive objects distort spacetime itself. This is not philosophical speculation. It has been experimentally confirmed countless times. Satellites orbiting Earth must continuously correct for relativistic effects. Without those corrections, GPS navigation would drift by kilometers each day. Time is flexible, elastic, dependent upon relationships between observers. Already, this alone challenges everyday intuition. But relativity introduced an even stranger implication. There is no universal present. Two observers moving differently through space-time may disagree about whether distant events occur simultaneously. Neither observer is objectively wrong. Their perspectives simply intersect reality differently. Pause for a moment and consider how astonishing this truly is. Most people imagine a gigantic cosmic clock somewhere in the universe announcing the official present moment. Physics finds no evidence such a clock exists. Instead, every observer carries their own temporal framework. The universe appears unwilling to privilege one master timeline over another. If there is no universal now, what exactly is moving from future into past? Or have we mistaken our own perspective for the architecture of reality? These questions become even more intriguing when we examine one of the most mysterious features of human consciousness: memory. We assume memory points backward because we remember yesterday, but not tomorrow. Yet memory itself is remarkably selective, reconstructive, and predictive. Every time you recall your childhood, your brain partially rebuilds the experience rather than replaying a perfect recording. Neural pathways reorganize, details shift, emotions reshape interpretation. The remembered past is continuously rewritten inside the present. Stranger still, the very same neural machinery responsible for remembering the past is also responsible for imagining the future. Brain imaging studies consistently reveal overlapping networks becoming active during both activities. The mind appears to simulate tomorrow using the architecture of yesterday. Perhaps memory and prediction are not separate abilities. Perhaps they are opposite directions along the same cognitive process. If so, our experience of time may emerge from the brain's continuous effort to organize possibility into narrative. A story, not unlike the one unfolding before you now, but stories possess authors, structures, architectures hidden beneath every page. And if time itself is a story consciousness tells, then somewhere beneath that story may exist an invisible design, one so fundamental that it quietly shapes every decision, every memory, every expectation, and every moment we have ever called now. In the next stage of this journey, we descend beneath the surface of ordinary perception to examine whether the illusion of temporal flow emerges from something far deeper, an unseen architecture encoded into the very fabric of consciousness itself. Imagine standing inside an immense cathedral unlike any ever built by human hands. There are no walls, no ceiling, no visible source of light. Instead, there is an endless geometric structure extending in every direction beyond imagination. Every possible moment of your life exists somewhere within this vast architecture, not as memories or predictions, but as complete realities occupying their own positions inside a larger design. You are 5 years old. You are reading your first book. You are grieving your greatest loss. You are making a decision that will alter everything that follows. You are taking your final breath. None of these moments are moving toward one another. None are disappearing behind you or waiting ahead. They simply exist, connected by relationships your ordinary perception cannot fully grasp. To our everyday awareness, such an idea sounds impossible. Yet throughout history, some of the most influential thinkers have repeatedly returned to remarkably similar visions of reality. Why? Because the deeper they examined time, the more difficult it became to treat it as an ordinary flowing substance. One of the oldest philosophical puzzles begins with a deceptively simple question: what is the present? The past no longer exists. The future has not yet arrived. The present seems to be all that remains. but attempt to isolate the present and it immediately vanishes. If the present possesses duration, even 1 second, it already contains an earlier part and a later part. That means it can be divided into past and future. Reduce it further. 1 millisecond, 1 microsecond, 1 nanosecond. No matter how small the interval becomes, it still has a beginning and an end. Continue dividing. Eventually, the present appears to shrink towards something with no duration at all, a mathematical boundary, a point without thickness. Yet a point without duration cannot contain experience. If the present has no length, how can anything ever happen within it? This paradox has troubled philosophers for over 2,000 years because it exposes an unsettling possibility. Perhaps the present is not an objective feature of the universe. Perhaps it is something consciousness continuously generates. Modern neuroscience offers clues that are surprisingly compatible with this ancient intuition. Your brain never receives reality all at once. Visual information travels at one speed. Sound arrives differently. Touch follows another pathway. Signals from muscles, joints, and internal organs each require their own processing time. If consciousness reported these signals immediately, your experience would be chaotic. A spoken sentence would separate into disconnected sounds. Objects would seem to vibrate apart. Movement would fragment into countless unrelated snapshots. Instead, the brain performs a remarkable act of synchronization. It gathers incoming information over a brief interval, predicts what is most likely occurring, and assembles everything into one coherent scene. The present you experience is less like a photograph and more like a continuously updated prediction. You do not simply observe reality. You participate in constructing it. This predictive nature of perception explains many familiar experiences. Consider catching a ball. By the time light from the moving ball reaches your eyes, travels through the optic nerve, and is processed by your brain, the ball has already changed position. If consciousness waited for certainty before acting, every catch would fail. Instead, your nervous system predicts where the ball will be before complete information arrives. You experience smooth motion because your brain is constantly projecting slightly ahead of sensory evidence. In a profound sense, you are always living inside an intelligent forecast. Now imagine extending this principle far beyond simple motion. What if your perception of temporal flow itself is another prediction? What if consciousness continuously estimates how events relate to one another, producing the sensation that time is passing? The implication is extraordinary. Perhaps time does not flow. Perhaps your model of reality flows. Physics introduces another layer to this mystery. Einstein's theory of relativity united space and time into a single four-dimensional structure known as space-time. In everyday life, we think of locations and moments as separate categories. Where something happens, when something happens. Relativity dissolves this distinction. Every event possesses both spatial coordinates and temporal coordinates simultaneously. A birthday, a supernova, a heartbeat, a distant galaxy forming billions of years ago. Each occupies its own location within space-time. Some physicists have interpreted this framework through what is often called the block universe perspective. In this interpretation, space-time resembles an already existing landscape. Past, present, and future are not continuously created. They coexist as different regions within one larger structure. Your experience of moving through time resembles a traveler following a path across a map. The map does not rearrange itself as the traveler walks. Only perspective changes. This remains one interpretation among several, and scientists continue to debate its implications. But its philosophical consequences are impossible to ignore. If all moments coexist within space-time, then the sensation of time flowing may originate primarily within conscious experience, rather than within the universe itself. Curiously, human memory reflects this possibility in unexpected ways. We often imagine memory as a storage room, where experiences remain preserved exactly as they occurred. Research paints a different picture. Every act of remembering changes the memory itself. Neural connections strengthen, others weaken. Details become more consistent with current beliefs. Emotions reshape interpretation. Each recollection is simultaneously an act of reconstruction. The past is never accessed unchanged. It is recreated. In this sense, memory behaves less like opening an archive and more like rebuilding a city from architectural plans. The overall structure remains recognizable. Individual details evolve. Even our identity depends upon this continual reconstruction. Ask yourself a difficult question. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Your body has changed. Most of your cells have been replaced. Your beliefs have evolved. Your memories have been rewritten countless times. The molecules composing your brain are not identical, yet you experience an unbroken continuity. What exactly remains constant? Perhaps identity itself is not an object moving through time. Perhaps it is a pattern extending across many moments simultaneously, like a melody. No individual note contains the music. Only their relationship creates the song. Consciousness may operate similarly. Each moment alone says very little. Meaning emerges from the architecture connecting them. This architectural perspective appears repeatedly in mathematics. A circle is not defined by any single point along its edge. A symphony is not defined by any isolated sound. A language is not defined by one letter. Structure matters more than individual components. The whole possesses properties that none of its parts contain independently. Could time itself be one of these emergent structures? Could the universe possess a hidden architecture in which temporal experience arises naturally from relationships rather than motion? If so, many mysteries begin to appear in a different light. Déjà vu, the strange elasticity of time during danger, the way childhood summers seemed endless while adulthood years seem to vanish, the dream that feels longer than the night's sleep that contained it. None necessarily prove that time is an illusion, but each reveals that our experience of time is astonishingly flexible. And flexibility often signals construction. The deeper we investigate, the less time resembles a universal current carrying everything forward. Instead, it begins to resemble a language, one spoken fluently by consciousness, but rarely understood by the speaker. If there truly exists a hidden architecture beneath temporal experience, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Who or what is reading that architecture? Is consciousness merely moving through space-time like a traveler through a landscape? Or could consciousness itself be part of the architecture, shaping the very illusion it believes it is observing? The answer may require us to examine not the universe first, but the observer who has been quietly constructing reality all along. For centuries, science searched the universe as though consciousness were a spectator, an accidental byproduct, watching reality unfold from the outside. Matter came first, space came first, time came first. Awareness appeared only after billions of years of cosmic evolution, arriving late to a universe that had already written its story. But what if this assumption has quietly shaped every question we have asked? Imagine attempting to understand music while refusing to acknowledge the existence of sound. You could measure the strings of a violin. You could calculate the vibration of air molecules. You could analyze the geometry of a concert hall. Every measurement would be correct, yet something essential would remain invisible: the experience itself. Consciousness presents a similar challenge. No matter how precisely neuroscience maps electrical activity across billions of neurons, one mystery remains untouched. Why should any physical process produce subjective experience at all? Why does the firing of neurons feel like something from the inside? This question has become known as the hard problem of consciousness, not because scientists lack intelligence, but because the gap between objective description and subjective experience appears unlike any other problem in science. You can describe every wavelength associated with the color blue. You can explain how the retina converts photons into electrical signals. You can map every neural pathway involved in visual perception. Yet none of these descriptions conveys what blue actually looks like. Experience itself remains irreducibly first person. This matters because our entire understanding of time depends upon experience. Without consciousness, what would past, present, or future actually mean? A supernova exploding billions of light years away has no apparent awareness of becoming its own past. A mountain does not wait for tomorrow. An atom does not remember yesterday. These categories emerge most vividly within conscious minds. Perhaps that is not a coincidence. Perhaps temporal experience is inseparable from awareness itself. Some philosophers have suggested that consciousness does not merely exist within time. Instead, time, as humans experience it, may exist within consciousness. At first, the statement sounds like a linguistic trick, yet consider what happens every night when you dream. Inside a dream, entire narratives unfold. You travel. You meet strangers. You remember events that never occurred. Minutes of sleeping may contain experiences that seem to last for days. Sometimes a single sound from the outside world, a ringing alarm, a closing door, distant thunder, is woven seamlessly into a dream already rich with apparent history. The dream mind constructs an entire temporal framework almost instantaneously. Characters appear to have known each other for years. Cities seem ancient, memories feel authentic, yet none of this history existed moments before. The architecture of time inside the dream emerges together with the dream itself. Only after awakening do you recognize that the sequence was generated by consciousness. This raises an unsettling possibility. How do we know waking life does not involve a similar process? Far more stable, vastly more consistent, but still fundamentally constructed. The brain is often compared to a camera recording reality. Increasingly, neuroscientists prefer a different metaphor. The brain behaves more like a prediction engine. Rather than passively receiving the world, it continuously generates expectation about what should happen next. Incoming sensory information does not create perception from nothing. Instead, it corrects ongoing predictions. Imagine walking through your home in complete darkness. You rarely collide with furniture because your brain already contains an internal model of the space. When your expectations match reality, movement feels effortless. When something has been moved unexpectedly, prediction fails, and surprise appears. Surprise, in this framework, is not merely emotional, it is informational. Reality has differed from the model. Now consider time. Perhaps the sensation of moving from one moment to another emerges because consciousness constantly predicts the immediate future, compares prediction with sensory input, and updates its internal model accordingly. The feeling of temporal flow could arise from this endless cycle of anticipation and correction. You do not simply remember the past, you continuously negotiate the future. This negotiation becomes especially visible during moments of danger. People involved in accidents often report that time slowed dramatically. Entire sequences seem to unfold in extraordinary detail. Objects appear suspended in space. Thoughts accelerate. Later analysis suggests that external clocks did not slow. Instead, the brain dramatically increased the density of information being processed. More experience was encoded within the same physical interval. Time seemed longer because consciousness became richer. The clock remained unchanged. Experience transformed. The opposite occurs in routine life. Drive a familiar road while thinking deeply about something else. Suddenly you arrive without remembering much of the journey. The minutes passed normally, yet subjective time appears compressed because relatively little new information entered conscious awareness. This suggests a profound principle. Our experience of time depends not only on duration, but also on the architecture of attention. Attention shapes temporal reality. The more deeply consciousness engages with experience, the more expansive time appears. The less attention we devote, the faster life seems to disappear. This may explain one of adulthood's greatest mysteries. Why does childhood feel so vast? Because nearly everything is new. Every face, every word, every street, every emotion. The young brain constructs immense amounts of fresh information. Years feel enormous because experience is dense. As familiarity increases throughout adulthood, prediction becomes more efficient. Life requires fewer updates. The architecture of experience compresses. Looking backward, entire years appear to vanish. Time itself did not accelerate. our model became more economical. Ancient contemplative traditions recognized this long before modern cognitive science. Meditation was often described not as escaping time, but as observing its construction. By remaining fully attentive to each sensation, without immediately organizing it into narrative, practitioners frequently reported that ordinary temporal boundaries softened, moments expanded, the present became astonishingly spacious. Past and future lost their usual psychological dominance. Interestingly, modern brain imaging has found measurable changes in networks associated with self-referential thinking and temporal processing during deep meditative states. The subjective reports differ across individuals and traditions, but one theme appears repeatedly. When attention changes, time changes. Not the clock, experience. This distinction may be the key to understanding the hidden architecture. Perhaps linear time is not the deepest layer of reality. Perhaps it is the interface through which consciousness organizes complexity into a survivable narrative. Just as a computer desktop hides billions of microscopic electrical operations beneath simple icons, temporal experience may conceal an unimaginably richer structure beneath its familiar appearance. Interfaces are not false, they are useful. A map is not the territory, yet without the map, navigation becomes nearly impossible. Similarly, the illusion of flowing time may be one of evolution's greatest achievements. Not because it reveals ultimate reality, but because it allows finite minds to navigate an infinite one. If this is true, then consciousness is not trapped inside time. It is using time like a language, like a coordinate system, like an operating interface, translating an incomprehensibly vast architecture into something the human mind can inhabit. But every interface hides as much as it reveals. The desktop conceals the machine. The map conceals the landscape. The story conceals the author. And if time is the interface, what lies beneath it? To approach that question, we must leave behind not only ordinary intuition, but even our familiar notions of causality itself, because the hidden architecture of time may not simply connect events. It may connect them in ways that make the distinction between cause and effect far less absolute than we have ever imagined. There is a quiet assumption woven into nearly every human decision. The cause always comes first. The effect always comes later. Strike a match, and the flame appears. Push a stone, and it rolls downhill. Speak a word, and someone hears it. This sequence feels so fundamental that questioning it seems almost irrational. Yet throughout the history of physics, some of the deepest discoveries have emerged precisely because scientists dared to question what appeared obvious. Time itself may be another example. Imagine watching an intricate domino arrangement from above. Thousands of pieces are positioned across an enormous floor, curving into spirals, branching into unexpected pathways, forming patterns too large to recognize from ground level. Standing beside the first domino, the chain reaction appears beautifully simple. One tile falls, striking the next, producing an unmistakable sequence of cause and effect. Now imagine rising higher. From sufficient altitude, you can see that every domino was already standing before the first one ever moved. The entire pattern already existed. The sequence of falling was real, but the architecture supporting it preceded every individual event. This distinction is subtle, yet transformative. Perhaps causality is not merely a chain. Perhaps it is a path through an already existing structure. Modern physics offers surprising reasons to consider this possibility. At the quantum level, the universe refuses to behave like the familiar world of everyday objects. Particles display correlations that challenge ordinary intuitions about distance, simultaneity, and measurement. Quantum entanglement, for example, reveals relationships between systems that cannot be fully explained by simple local interactions alone. These phenomena do not allow messages to travel backward through time, nor do they overturn the foundations of relativity. Yet they remind us that nature often resists the categories our intuition prefers. The universe repeatedly demonstrates that reality is under no obligation to resemble common sense. Some theoretical physicists have explored models in which the fundamental equations of nature remain remarkably symmetrical with respect to time. In many cases, the microscopic laws governing physical processes do not inherently distinguish between forward and backward temporal directions. The asymmetry we experience, the unmistakable arrow pointing from yesterday toward tomorrow, appears instead to emerge from statistical conditions, especially the increase of entropy. Entropy is often described as disorder, but that description can be misleading. A more useful interpretation is the number of possible arrangements available to a system. Imagine a pristine deck of cards. There are relatively few ordered configurations. Shuffle it repeatedly, and the number of possible arrangements becomes astronomically larger. Nothing forces the cards toward disorder. Probability simply favors it. Likewise, the arrow of time may arise not because time itself possesses direction, but because certain configurations are overwhelmingly more likely than others. Our experience of irreversible change could therefore emerge from the architecture of probability, rather than from an invisible current flowing through the cosmos. If that is true, then the sensation of moving relentlessly forward may reflect how consciousness navigates statistical landscapes, rather than how reality itself unfolds. Notice how this idea quietly echoes something far more personal. When you remember your past, you rarely recall every detail equally. Your mind selects certain moments: a childhood birthday, an unexpected conversation, a painful goodbye, a single sentence that changed your life. These memories become anchors. Around them, countless smaller experiences fade into obscurity. The narrative of your life is not built from everything that happened. It is built from meaningful structure, meaning compresses experience into identity. Without this compression, memory would become unusable. Every second would possess equal importance. Decision-making would collapse beneath infinite detail. Consciousness survives by constructing patterns. The architecture matters more than the individual bricks. This principle appears everywhere in nature. A flock of birds does not require a central commander. Each bird follows simple local rules. Together, they produce astonishingly elegant collective motion. An ant colony builds elaborate cities without any individual ant understanding the entire design. The human brain itself contains roughly 86 billion neurons. No single neuron knows your name. No neuron understands your dreams. Yet together they generate a unified, conscious experience. Complexity often emerges from relationships rather than centralized control. Could time itself emerge similarly? Could temporal flow arise from countless interactions occurring within a deeper informational architecture? Increasingly, some researchers have begun exploring precisely this possibility. Information has become one of the most powerful concepts in modern science. Black holes, quantum computing, thermodynamics, biology, neuroscience. Across seemingly unrelated disciplines, information repeatedly appears as something more fundamental than previously imagined. Rather than viewing matter as primary and information as secondary, some theoretical frameworks reverse the relationship. Physical reality may itself emerge from deeper informational structures. If information lies beneath matter, and consciousness continuously organizes information into meaningful narratives, then our experience of time may be the consequence of how information becomes sequentially accessible to awareness. The universe would not resemble a film being projected frame by frame. It would resemble an immense library. Every page already exists. Consciousness reads one page after another, constructing continuity from access rather than creation. This perspective offers an intriguing way to think about one of humanity's oldest questions. Why can't we remember the future? Perhaps because memory is not determined solely by what exists. It depends upon how information is encoded. You cannot remember the final chapter of a novel before reading it, not because the chapter does not exist, but because your relationship to that information has not yet been established. The limitation belongs to the reader, not necessarily to the book. Whether this analogy reflects physical reality remains unknown. Science has not demonstrated that future events are stored like chapters waiting to be discovered. Yet the analogy illuminates an important distinction. Existence and accessibility are not identical concepts. Many features of reality exist beyond direct human perception. Ultraviolet light, radio waves, dark matter, gravitational waves. Entire dimensions of information remain inaccessible until appropriate instruments are developed. Perhaps consciousness itself is one such instrument, remarkably sophisticated, yet still limited by its own architecture. If so, then what we call the present may be the bandwidth through which awareness accesses an unimaginably larger informational landscape. Every moment feels singular because our conscious channel is finite. The universe, however, may not share that limitation. This possibility also transforms how we think about free will. If every event were rigidly predetermined, human choice would become meaningless. If everything were entirely random, meaningful choice would disappear for a different reason. Reality seems to occupy an extraordinary middle ground. Constraints exist, possibilities exist. Within those possibilities, Conscious decisions shape the pathways that become actualized. Perhaps freedom does not require an unwritten universe. Perhaps it requires an architecture rich enough to contain many viable trajectories. With consciousness participating in which path becomes experienced. A mountain contains countless trails. The mountain already exists. The journey does not. Each traveler creates a unique experience by choosing where to walk, when to pause, what to notice, and how to interpret the landscape. The architecture provides possibility. Consciousness provides meaning, and meaning may be the hidden force that binds time into the coherent story we call a life. Yet one profound question still remains unanswered. If the illusion of time emerges from the relationship between consciousness and a deeper architecture, why does that illusion feel so convincing? Why do we awaken each morning utterly certain that yesterday has vanished and tomorrow has not yet arrived? To answer that final question, we must return to where this journey began, not to the universe, but to ourselves, because the greatest mystery of time may never have been hidden inside the cosmos. It may have been hidden inside the observer who has been experiencing it all along. Every civilization has left behind monuments, stone temples, observatories, libraries, cathedrals, laboratories. Each was built upon the same quiet conviction that beneath the apparent chaos of existence lies an intelligible order waiting to be discovered. Generation after generation, humanity has searched for the hidden architecture of reality. Sometimes we searched in the stars, sometimes inside atoms, sometimes within mathematics, sometimes through meditation, sometimes through philosophy. Again and again, we believed the next discovery would finally reveal what time truly is. Yet perhaps we have been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, "What is time?" perhaps we should ask, "Why does consciousness experience reality as time at all?" This subtle shift changes the direction of the entire investigation. Throughout this journey, we have encountered ideas from neuroscience, philosophy, cognitive science, and modern physics. Some are firmly supported by experimental evidence. Others remain active areas of theoretical debate. Together, they do not prove that time is an illusion in the literal sense, but they do reveal something equally profound. Our ordinary experience of time is not a transparent window onto reality. It is a construction. The brain synchronizes delayed sensory information into a coherent present. Memory reconstructs rather than perfectly retrieves the past. Prediction continuously reaches toward the future before new information arrives. Attention stretches and compresses subjective duration. Relativity demonstrates that there is no single universal now, shared by every observer. Every layer we examined points toward the same remarkable conclusion. The experience of temporal flow depends as much on the observer as on the universe being observed. This realization does not diminish reality. It deepens it. Imagine standing before an immense stained glass window at sunrise. The colored patterns projected across the floor change as the sun moves through the sky. The light appears to travel. The colors seem alive. Yet neither the glass nor the sunlight alone creates the experience. Only their relationship does. Consciousness and reality may function in much the same way. Neither independently generates the world you experience. Meaning emerges through interaction. Time, then, may not be a thing. It may be a relationship. Relationships possess extraordinary properties. Music does not exist inside isolated notes. Language does not exist inside individual letters. Life does not emerge from a single cell, but from countless interactions among trillions of them. Likewise, temporal experience may emerge from the relationship between consciousness, information, memory, prediction, and the structure of the universe itself. None alone is sufficient. Together they create the seamless continuity we call a lifetime. This perspective also changes how we think about identity. Most people imagine themselves as objects moving through time. A child becomes an adult becomes elderly. Eventually, the story ends. But perhaps identity is less like a moving object and more like a pattern woven through an entire tapestry. Consider a constellation in the night sky. The stars themselves may be separated by unimaginable distances. Some no longer even exist. Their light continues traveling across space, long after their transformation. Yet from Earth's perspective, the pattern remains recognizable. The constellation is not contained within any individual star. It exists in the relationship among them. Human identity may be remarkably similar. Your life is not contained entirely within this present instant. It exists across relationships connecting memories, choices, hopes, experiences, and possibilities into one coherent structure. The hidden architecture is not merely beneath time, it is beneath selfhood. This understanding carries profound practical consequences. If subjective time expands with attention, then awareness becomes one of the most valuable resources a human being possesses. Every distracted day quietly compresses into memory. Every deeply lived moment expands. Perhaps the richness of life has never depended solely upon how many years we receive. Perhaps it depends upon how completely consciousness inhabits each experience. Modern life often encourages the opposite. Notification interrupt thought. Schedules divide attention. Algorithms compete for awareness. The architecture of distraction fragments experience into ever smaller pieces. Ironically, as technology promises to save time, many people report feeling that time is disappearing faster than ever. Not because clocks accelerate, because attention becomes increasingly divided. A fragmented mind experiences a fragmented life. To reclaim attention is not simply to become more productive. It may be to reclaim time itself, not by changing the universe, but by transforming the quality of experience. This insight echoes wisdom preserved across cultures for thousands of years. Whether expressed through contemplation, philosophy, prayer, artistic creation, or scientific curiosity, humanity has repeatedly discovered that presence changes reality, not necessarily by altering external events, but by changing the architecture through which those events are experienced. Perhaps this explains why certain moments remain vivid decades later. A conversation beneath falling snow, a parent's embrace, the silence after receiving life-changing news, the first time you saw the ocean, the final goodbye to someone you loved. Measured by clocks, these moments were brief. Measured by consciousness, they became immense. They continue shaping the architecture of your identity long after the seconds themselves have vanished. So, where does this leave our original question? Is time an illusion? The answer depends upon what we mean by illusion. A rainbow is an optical phenomenon. It depends upon sunlight, water droplets, and an observer standing in precisely the right place. Remove any one of those elements, and the rainbow disappears. Yet no one would call a rainbow unreal. Its existence emerges through relationship. Time may be similar. The flow we experience could be an emergent phenomenon, real as experience, even if it is not fundamental in the way our intuition first imagined. Perhaps the hidden architecture behind the illusion of time is neither a secret machine nor a cosmic clock. Perhaps it is the astonishing relationship between consciousness and the universe. A relationship so seamless that we mistake its interface for reality itself. Science will continue exploring this mystery. Philosophy will continue refining its questions. Neuroscience will continue uncovering how the brain constructs experience. Physics will continue searching for deeper laws beneath space-time. None of these journeys is complete, and perhaps they never will be, because every answer opens a doorway to an even deeper question. The greatest discoveries are rarely those that eliminate mystery. They are the ones that reveal how much more there is to understand. So the next time you glance at a clock, pause before accepting what it seems to tell you. The hands may be measuring change. Your brain may be constructing sequence. Your memories may be rebuilding the past. Your expectations may already be shaping the future. And somewhere beneath all of it, beneath every heartbeat, every choice, every sunrise, every farewell, every lifetime, there may exist an invisible architecture, vast beyond imagination, patiently holding every possibility while consciousness traces a single luminous path through its endless design. Perhaps time has never been carrying you forward. Perhaps you have always been discovering a universe that was waiting, not to trap you inside its moments, but to awaken you to the extraordinary architecture hidden within them all.